Well, I want to welcome everyone who is here in person in Harrisburg and in person in Lancaster and also on the Zoom. We appreciate you coming today and participating in this forum. Welcome to everyone who's joining us at these locations. And I want to acknowledge and welcome Mayor Wanda Williams here in Harrisburg. We appreciate Mayor Williams' attendance at our event and hope that she enjoys as much as we will. So I am Barry Loveland. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm chair of the LGBT Center of Central Pennsylvania History Project. And I'm also a volunteer serving on a special task force to explore the possibilities of developing housing for LGBTQ plus seniors in Central Pennsylvania. Several months ago, I approached Amanda Arbor, Executive Director of the LGBT Center of Central PA, with the idea that we start a task force, including Amanda and a couple of volunteers, just to begin gathering information about senior housing issues. And after some initial research, we decided to plan this next phase of our project, which is a series of community forums to present information and case studies of LGBTQ plus senior housing developments from around the country, and case studies of LGBT senior housing developments. And to also hear from community members about what they would like to see done locally to create more options for LGBTQ plus seniors in housing and related services. We soon learned that the LGBTQ plus coalition in Lancaster was on a similar track. And so the two groups have decided to work together to plan these series of forums and hopefully work together in the future toward similar goals. I want to please welcome Amanda Arbor, she, her pronouns, Executive Director of the LGBT Center of Central PA, who will discuss some of the work that's currently being done by the LGBT Center in the subject of housing.
Thank you so much, Barry. And thank you again to everyone who's here with us in Harrisburg, as well as virtually and in Lancaster. So we've been excited to do some work around housing in the past 3 years here in Harrisburg. So 3 years ago at GLOW, which is one of our programs specifically serving LGBTQ youth and young adults of color, we started an emergency housing fund that helps to meet people's immediate housing needs. So helping cover their rent, put them in a hotel, providing emergency housing and covering people's rent, and other items such as utilities, food, clothing that they might need. So we've been doing that for the past 3 years through GLOW, and that has grown from a Facebook fundraiser that raised about $500 to some large grants that we've secured, including from the city of Harrisburg. So we're grateful for the CDBG grant funding from the city to support that program as well. We also, in the past 2 years, started the At-Home program, which is funded through the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency, a 12-month rapid rehousing program to help get folks in their apartments, and then support them over the course of a year to be able to maintain that housing. And we just secured a new grant through the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency that will allow us to purchase a building of probably 2 units to be able to use as 1-year transitional housing. So we're very excited about that as the next iteration of our at-home program. So I will turn it back over to Barry now.
Okay, so I'd like to welcome next Kay Foley, they, them pronouns, and Kay is the Executive Director of the Lancaster LGBTQ plus Coalition, and they will discuss some of the work currently being done by the coalition in the subject of housing. Okay.
Thank you, Barry. Just wanted to welcome all of the people that we had no idea they were all going to come. We're so excited to have them here in person. So we are a much smaller organization. We started in 2019, launched right before the pandemic. So we had an office space and then moved very quickly into our kitchens and began to do emergency funds for housing. We also started our HEART program. There's, I'm sure as it is in Harrisburg, a huge housing crisis here. So our HEART program is subsidized housing. We have a small 4-bed unit right now. So that's been going on since 2020, and we have over 1,900 nights and beds. So we're very proud of that. And right now what we're looking at is intergenerational communal housing on the top floor. We moved into our space here, downtown Lancaster, about a year ago. And on the top floor, there's 5,500 square feet of intergenerational communal housing is what we're looking at. So about 15 units, potentially shared units. And so we are in the process right now of going after all of the funding that's being released. So that's where we're at in our stages. So thank you all.
Thank you, Kay. So I wanted to mention that this is the first of 3 planned forums. This one will concentrate on examples of development for low-cost housing for LGBTQ plus seniors. And in the second forum that we're planning will be to address examples of transitional housing and services for youth and young adults. The third forum will look at multi-generational models, developments combining housing and services for all generations of the LGBTQ plus community. And we'll be announcing dates for the second and third forum soon and hope to have them this fall yet. Then early next year, we're going to begin a needs assessment of the community, a needs assessment process that will, the results are going to factor into a new strategic plan for the LGBT Center in Central PA, and into future planning, I think, also for the LGBTQ plus Coalition in Lancaster. And we already had a couple of conversations with developers who seem interested in our initiative and our vision. So we expect more of these conversations to take place with people in the next few months. We're also seeking more volunteers willing to join our task force. So please be aware that we are, while we're taking a serious look at these issues, we cannot guarantee that this process will lead to creation of one or more development projects of new housing in Central PA, or that projects will be completed in any specific period of time. I am pleased at this time to welcome 2 representatives from SAGE, which is a national organization founded in 1978, providing advocacy and services for LGBTQ plus elders. They will be providing an introduction to the challenges of affordable LGBTQ plus senior housing. Thomas Godwin, they, them, is the Assistant Director of National LGBTQ plus Elder Housing Initiative for SAGE. They have their master's in social work from St. Louis University with a concentration in clinical practice. Prior to working with the National LGBTQ plus Elder Housing Initiative, Thomas has experience working in mental health crisis care and nonprofit development. They also have experience as a facilitator and educator for the Alzheimer's Association. Thomas has also served as a consultant and educator for organizations around the issues of sex education, relationships, gender identity, and sexuality. Thomas is passionate about cultivating LGBTQ plus joy and exploring state parks in Missouri. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Sydney too, because I think you're going to be kind of team leading this session. So Sydney Cobb Richardson, she, her, is the director of SAGE's National LGBTQ plus Elder Housing Initiative, working to reshape the housing landscape nationally and increase the availability of safer LGBTQ plus affirming elder housing through public education, advocacy, and housing development. Previously, Sydney worked in Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York City in direct service, organizing and advocacy, and policy analysis around affordable housing development, mental health, HIV advocacy, and healthcare access. Sydney brings a reverence for expertise and legacies of LGBTQ plus elders in the formation of policies and programming developed to serve them in the fight for collective liberation. And she brings this to SAGE's national housing work. So Thomas and Sydney, take it away.
Thank you, Barry, for that lovely introduction. Sydney and I will be tag teaming a presentation from Sage, and Sydney will actually be hopping on during the second half of our presentation. So thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with some slides now. Okay. Wonderful. Well, we are really excited to be here and very excited for the work happening in both Harrisburg and Lancaster. So today, our role in this conversation today is to bring some of our knowledge from the National Housing Initiative about developing LGBTQ+ affirming and affordable housing for older adults. We have experiences developing our own buildings in New York City, and we've also supported the development of this type of building across the country. And so today we'll be talking a little bit about the barriers that LGBTQ+ older adults face when seeking housing, and then we'll also be talking about some challenges and lessons learned from the development process. So we're just going to go ahead and dive right into our conversation today and talk some about the barriers that LGBTQ+ older adults have experienced when seeking out housing. And we're going to start off with some statistics about housing discrimination and houselessness. First, we know that 48% of older adult same-sex couples have experienced discrimination when searching for housing. And we also know that 25% of transgender or gender nonconforming older adults have experienced discrimination when searching for housing. And this discrimination can look like many different things. It can look like being turned away from a unit in a building or a house. It can also look like being turned away from a shelter, but it could also look like mistreatment in a residential facility where caretakers, nurses, social workers, or other people are discriminating against residents because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. There are many ways that this housing discrimination can take place, and it's very evident based on the data that we know that this discrimination still is taking place for many older adults in the community. Additionally, this discrimination can lead to houselessness for folks who do not have a place to lay their head at night. And specifically from data that we found in the Bradbury-Sullivan, they did a community feedback survey, I believe, and we found some data from their survey that states that 14% of LGBTQ+ older adults in Pennsylvania have experienced houselessness in their lifetime. And so we know that this discrimination is affecting our older adults. We also know that it is leading to houselessness for folks in the community, which makes the need for affirming housing and affordable housing ever more important across the state of Pennsylvania. I also want to briefly touch on some of the more nuanced housing barriers that LGBTQ+ older adults might experience when seeking housing. These housing barriers might not jump out at us as barriers, but they are things that keep LGBTQ+ older adults from experiencing safety and care in housing. This is also just 4 of many barriers, and so we're going to touch on a few, but I encourage you to look into more of our National Housing Initiative resources if you'd like to learn more about the barriers that this community faces when seeking housing. First, the financial barrier is a huge barrier for the community. Based on national data, we know that LGBTQ+ older adults, and particularly trans older adults or LGBTQ+ older adults of color, experience disparate rates of financial insecurity. Oftentimes what this looks like is that disproportionately, LGBTQ+ older adults have less money saved up for retirement or for aging care as they get older than non-LGBTQ+ counterparts. And so the affordability of housing becomes a real issue for this community, particularly as we think about the inclusivity of trans older adults and LGBTQ+ older adults of color. Another barrier is access to gender-affirming care. Gender-affirming care can be any type of care that affirms and validates the gender identity of a transgender or gender nonconforming person. Unfortunately, in many residential care settings, gender-affirming care is not practiced, and we oftentimes see that transgender people are turned away from this type of housing, or they feel that they need to hide their identity in residential facilities for older adults because there's not access to gender-affirming services or care within the building. The third thing we have on here is intake processes. This can be a very nuanced barrier, but intake processes can sometimes make assumptions about a new resident's gender identity or the gender identity of their partner or their partnership status. And these assumptions can be a really bad first impression that an older adult experiences when going through the intake processes as at a residential facility. And that might seem like a small thing to impact someone, but we're talking about a first impression at your home, your new home where you're hoping to age an aging community. And so little things can build up to really impact the safety and experience of an LGBTQ plus older adult seeking housing. The last thing we have on here is resident-on-resident harm or resident-based discrimination. We know that this discrimination occurs in communal housing or residential communities. This discrimination can be on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity, but it can also be on the basis of other hatefulness or bigotry like racism, ableism, ageism, or classism, or other types of hatefulness. And so while this can be a really challenging thing to navigate in our residences, excuse me, it's really important that we think about how we as providers can respond to instances of resident-based discrimination if or when they come up. Now, I also want to briefly touch on the development process for building housing and specifically housing communities for older adults. This is a very generalist four-step process that we like to think about the process of housing development, but by no means is this a covering of all the different steps that it takes to build housing. But as we look at these four steps, it helps us as community providers to think about where we can engage the community to make sure that their voices are heard in these different stages of development. So for example, if we're looking at site selection, folks might be thinking, well, there's so many steps to that. You have to accrue capital, you have to accrue support, you have to look in neighborhoods, you have to connect with neighborhoods. There's so many different steps to the site selection process. But as a community provider, we're often thinking, how can we get the community's input on site selection? What sort of resources need to be around this building to ensure that the community has the services that they need? What sort of neighborhood would the community want this building to be in, particularly where LGBTQ plus older adults might feel safe in a given neighborhood? So that's just one example of how community engagement can be thought at these different four stages of the process to ensure that LGBTQ plus older adults are supported at every stage of this process. And that's why here at the bottom of this slide, we have community engagement sort of covering all of this timeline. And I would even encourage you to put community engagement on all of this timeline and then also at the very beginning of this timeline as well. It's very important that we're connecting with the community members we're trying to serve to make sure that their voice is heard in this development process. And the last thing I want to touch on today before we get to hear from our wonderful panelists is that we at SAGE had the opportunity to host a roundtable conversation focused on housing for LGBTQ plus older adults in the state of Pennsylvania. This conversation was in December of 2022, and a recorded streaming of this conversation can be found on our website. This was a really wonderful conversation. It sparked a lot of future conversations and work that we've seen coming throughout the state. And there were wonderful participants and speakers in that conversation who I know are here on our call today. But just a couple highlights from this conversation I want to touch on is that at this conversation, we got to hear from representatives from the John C. Anderson Apartments, which is an existing apartment building for older adults focused on LGBTQ plus inclusion and affordability. You'll get to hear more about that apartment building in Philadelphia here in a moment. We also heard from representatives from the Oakland Pride Apartments, which is an upcoming development in the process of development in Pittsburgh. And so we're very excited to see that building come up to support LGBTQ plus older adults in Pittsburgh. Other topics of conversation that circulated at our roundtable were discussing what alternative housing models we could implement aside from the affordable tax credit apartment buildings that we oftentimes see for this model. So we talked about accessory dwelling units and community land trusts and equity cooperatives as possibilities for building and organizing housing for LGBTQ plus older adults. And we also touched on the reality that LGBTQ plus older adults experience disproportionate rates of social isolation, and that this is a rampant problem within our community at all ages and specifically for older adults. And so how could we organize around creating community and housing spaces so that the older adults in our community are not experiencing as much social isolation and are able to age with other people who support them and care about them for who they are? So I'm going to pause here. We have more to share about the challenges and lessons learned, which Sydney is going to touch on later in our presentation. But I am very excited for y'all to hear from some of our wonderful panelists about their work in building LGBTQ plus affirming housing.
Okay, thank you so much. And I want to remind everybody that the folks that are on the Zoom, you can put your questions and comments in the chat. And the people who are in person, either in Lancaster or here in Harrisburg, if you'll write down your questions on the cards, and pens are provided for you. And we'll collect them later and read them here at the Q&A session. So we are very pleased to have 3 speakers who represent development projects in LGBTQ plus senior housing. They will be showcasing their projects as models that we might want to consider to help shape our planning here in central Pennsylvania. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Imani Woody, she, her pronouns. Dr. Woody is the founding director and CEO of Mary's House for Older Adults Incorporated, creating affirming housing and environments for LGBTQ SGL elders. She has a PhD in human services, specializing in nonprofit management. Her thesis, Lift Every Voice, a qualitative exploration of ageism and heterosexism as experienced by older African-American lesbian women and gay males when addressing social services, shortened a data gap of the marginalized and often an invisible population. She holds a Master's of Human Services degree from Lincoln University and is a graduate of Georgetown University's paralegal program. Dr. Imani Woody has been an advocate of women, people of color, and LGBTQ SGL issues for more than 20 years. She works as a diversity and inclusion consultant in the field of health, aging, and issues affecting LGBTQ plus SGL individuals and people of color communities. Dr. Woody is a member of the National LGBT Elder Housing Initiative and has presented on LGBT housing issues at the White House. As a licensed Standards of Excellence consultant, Dr. Woody's specialty is to work with nonprofit organizations to develop more ethical, stronger, and culturally competent boards of directors and a more engaged staff. She is adept at structuring and facilitating strategic planning processes, including changes in organizational focus. Dr. Woody is a mayoral appointee to the DC Mayor's Age-Friendly City. She is a former 3-term appointee to the DC Mayor LGBTQ Advisory Council and the program officer for the Older Adults Advisory Council for the Metropolitan Community Churches. Dr. Woody is a board member of the LGBT Technology Partnership and has served many boards, including serving as chair and program executive for services and advocacy for GLBT Elders, SAGE, Metro DC, an organization serving LGBTQ elders, the Mautner Project, and Women in the Life Association. Formerly a training specialist for the AARP's Foundation, Dr. Woody developed curriculum and delivery of on-site and web-based trainings. She trains substantive experts to become trainers through the Train the Trainer program and provided ongoing technical assistance to field trainers. Dr. Woody's been a life coach for more than 10 years and is the founder and principal of Living Life Like Golden. It's a 6-part program that empowers people to have live their lives more fully through envisioning. She lives with her wife of 18 years in Brooklyn, Washington, DC. Welcome, Dr. Woody.
Thank you, Barry. I see I sent in the long bio. Woo. Thank you so much for your kind words. Many thanks to SAGE and Central Pennsylvania for having me here. I'm so excited to be able to share my experiences in building alternative housing. But before we start, I'd like to take a moment of silence to acknowledge the lives lost through the pandemics of COVID, racism, and hatred of LGBTQ plus SGL same gender loving people. Just a moment. Thank you. All right, so I have some slides. Excellent, thank you so much. Next slide, please. So I love Pennsylvania. I spent many summers in Pittsburgh, where my aunt and uncle lived across from a mining unit, and in Philadelphia, where another aunt and uncle lived across the street from Connie Mack Stadium, the old Connie Mack Stadium. But my recent love for Pennsylvania includes how it values its LGBTQ citizens. I was honored to be invited by then Senator Bob Casey as chairman of the Special Committee on Aging to participate in a briefing on issues impacting LGBTQ elders, Black people in particular. And in August of last year, I learned that the Pennsylvania Governor Tom Wolf signed an executive order protecting LGBTQ people from the archaic practice of conversion therapy. You all are just cutting edge. Woohoo. Next slide, please. So why Mary's House for Older Adults? The need for Mary's House for Older Adults came when I began to care for my dad, who was in a good facility. He went incontinent and we pulled him out. We went incontinent and came out incontinent. And so we pulled him out and he died at home. And he had advocates. He had me, he had my wife, he had his friends, his grandkids to advocate for him. And I wondered what would have happened. And it wasn't that the people treated him meanly or with maltreatment. It was just the nature of nursing homes, the nature of residences for older people. And so it's not their fault, it's the culture. But I wonder what would have happened had he been an out gay man or an out trans person. What would have happened to him then? Continue though. So we know of the critical need for affordable housing that respects and affirms LGBTQ plus SGL, same gender loving persons. We at Mary's House for Older Adults take that truth a step further. Housing should also mean family and community. Gay folks have always had families of choice. Logical families is what I call them. And we are building on that strength. Mary's House for Older Adults is creating communal, independent housing, similar to the concept of Golden Girls, the Golden Girls living arrangement. I love me some Blanche. Social isolation will be hard pressed to thrive in our environments. So our residents, the residences that we build will be places where you can bring your whole self, your old self, your tall self, your Black self, your skinny self, your fat self, your whole self. Next slide, please. Can you imagine in your golden years living in a safe and welcoming space where everyone knows you and there's systems in place that contribute to your well-being? Next slide, please. This is us. This is Mary's House for Older Adults, the rendering. It's in the Fort DuPont neighborhood in Southeast Washington, D.C., an 8,885 square foot site, and it is the location of my childhood home. The ground level will include the reception area, a great room, porch, gotta have a front porch, administrative offices, living room. The upper two levels will include 7 living units each, a game room, an arts and crafts room, a common area for storage, seating, and laundry facilities. Several amenities in the basement level will include an exercise room, a quiet room, a community meeting space as well. And we will have an outdoor terrace with a stone wall, vegetated roof garden, and seating area. Demolition began this week. It was bittersweet to see my old house go down, but it's wonderful to know that this will be built in its place. Next slide, please. These are proposed services and amenities. And we've also created a curriculum to assist our residents in living together. We're not like John C. Anderson. We're not a big apartment building. We are doing communal living, and it has different kinds of nuances. So we want our residents to survive and thrive. Next slide, please. From 800K to 12 million. You all, when we started this process, we thought we could refurbish my 4-bedroom childhood home and it wouldn't take any time at all. And that cost more than $800,000. 10 plus years in the process, and the project is now $12 million. That's going from a fish fry fundraising to major investment support. It loosely breaks down to acquisition costs, construction costs, and the remaining in soft costs like architectural fees and accounting fees. Next slide, please. And this is how we did it. We got low-income housing tax credits, we got permanent loans, construction loans, some sponsor equity, and tax credit equity. Next slide, please. And this is who we did it with. Our partners have been supportive from the beginning since they came on board, and fantastic. Next slide, please. And this is the entire crew to building this communal residence. So the lawyers, the government folks, the National Housing Trust people, project capital people, neighborhood folks. These are all the folks who made this dream a reality. Next slide, please. And I can't stress this enough, early partners. I understand the mayor is here in this meeting. That is so welcome, Mayor. It is so critical for our elected leaders to understand that in addition to obtaining the finances, it's important to have allies and people who understand your story and understand why housing of this kind is needed for this demographic. It is important. When we first started out, we had elected officials who said, why would LGBTQ plus SGL people, elders need another space in another? Why would you want to build this? What is the importance? Those same people were at the groundbreaking and said, oh, Dr. Woody, so great, so glad that we're doing this. So this is me and Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, one of our earliest and most ardent supporters. Lucky for you all, your senator and governor do understand this issue. Next slide, please. So one of the biggest challenges is the size of our project. It's not even an apartment building. It's it has 15 studios, 15 studio units. We intentionally did not build a 30-room apartment complex on the site to create family and community. This meant that many investors and developers did not see any money to be made and just kind of said, bye-bye, good luck. Talk about rejection. However, Mary's House for Older Adults was gaining traction on a national level and asked to speak about its alternative housing model, as well as the issues impacting LGBTQ plus elders. Next slide, please. And this is us at the groundbreaking, and a happy, happy, happy day in July. Left to right, that's Councilmember Bonds. The other people beside her are reps from Goldman Sachs. The first hard hat is our developer, Dr. Gina Merritt, our mayor, me, the treasurer of our board. Our next residents we're thinking will be single family housing. Next slide, please. I want to give a quick shout out to our flagship program, the Villages at Mary's House. So we know we can't build enough alternative housing for our folks, and they still need to be connected. We have a friendly caller program that allows elders to be contacted same time every week or two by someone they know. We're talking 6 degrees of separation, not a voice of a government worker or someone they do not know. We send cards on anniversaries, whether it's a birthday anniversary or celebrating a transition. We do drive-bys and we do just because cards. We provide meals and food for those experiencing food insecurity. And we have folks in DC, Maryland, Virginia, Georgia, New York, Florida, California, and of course, PA. Next slide, please. Thank you all so much. I'm so excited to see what you all will be building in Pennsylvania, Central Pennsylvania in particular. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Woody.
You're so welcome.
Thank you so much. And Ed Miller will be the next person speaking. Ed Miller is he, him pronouns, is the William Way LGBT Community Center of Philadelphia, Elder Initiative Social Engagement Manager. Ed works extensively within the LGBTQ plus community and the Aging Services Network to achieve the best outcomes for LGBTQ plus elders accessing services. Ed manages the Philadelphia Area on Aging Partnership, participates in the PA LGBT Aging Work Group, and plays a key role to support the Pennsylvania Department of Aging and its relentless commitment to LGBTQ plus elders in the Delaware Valley. At William Way, Ed stewards established social and educational programs designed to help keep seniors in the community as they age, and is a SAGE Collab proud partner. In 2014, the John C. Anderson LGBT Friendly Apartments opened its doors, and Ed has filled the role of supportive services coordinator, offering direct services, and has the enormous honor of being in community with the JCAA residents. I'm also going to introduce Jacob Fisher. Ed and Jacob are going to work together on the presentation on the Philadelphia project, and then Jacob is going to talk more about other projects that he's been involved with. So Jacob, he, him, serves as Regional Vice President at Penrose Developers. In this role, he oversees all development activities in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. Jacob brings more than 15 years of experience to Penrose and has been instrumental in working with partners from the public, private, and nonprofit sectors to bring development projects to fruition. Jacob has secured financing and led award-winning development teams on more than 1,100 units of new housing, with a total investment of well over $300 million. Jacob joined Penrose in 2007 as an associate developer. Prior to Penrose, he worked on community development in the public sector as an assistant director for policy for the mayor of Philadelphia. Jacob received his Bachelor's of Arts from Wesleyan University and his Master's of Government Administration with a concentration in public finance from the University of Pennsylvania Fells Institute of Government. So welcome, both Ed and Jacob.
Thank you, Barry. Yeah, I think I'm going to rely on Jacob if there are any questions about the financing and the tax credit process, because there were some bumps in the road early on. But I'll just go through my presentation and then we'll go to Jacob. But yeah, it's been really nice to get to know Barry and Amanda and Kay over the last couple of months, and I appreciate you inviting me on this panel. I thought I'd take 1 minute to talk about the unique partnership that we have here in Philadelphia. Traditionally, Penrose Properties has a supportive services coordinator who provides activities and events for residents. And because we were so close by the William Way LGBT Community Centers right around the corner, there were early conversations about bringing the LGBT senior programs that we are offering and extending them over to the residents in John C. Anderson. And then, so that got the wheels going of to having a partnership between the community center and Penrose. And we, to this day, share a memo of understanding that I'm there, certain amount of hours a week providing supportive services. So it's been so that's how we that's what it's like in Philadelphia, and it was really cool to get that going off the ground. Just a little bit about the property. It's owned and operated by Penrose. It's at 251 South 13th Street, right in the neighborhood in Philadelphia. In fact, the east side of the building is on Camac Street, which is, you know, one of the streets that has some of the gay bars in Philadelphia there. So it's fun to see. Well, some of the seniors go to the piano bar during the week, so it's fun to see them come back and forth. But so yeah, we're celebrating 10 years later on this year. January was the grand opening in 2014, and so later on in this year there's going to be a big celebration at John C. Anderson. So that'll be a fun opportunity to see everybody come back together. That was part of the original project. The building is 6 stories. There are 56 units. They're all 1-bedroom apartments, very similar in size. You know, there are air conditioning. There's air conditioning and dishwashers. Each floor has a small room of you know, units for people to store things if they want. There's a trash room on each floor. And also, and on the 5th floor, there's a really spacious, beautiful deck that looks over part of the city. And there are chairs and tables and a herb garden that people tend to up there. And so it's really has a lot of amenities up on the floors. And so, but if you walk into the lobby, there is the property manager's office, and then the mail area, and then a really nice living room. We call it the library. We have books and videos of people lending library. But then the far wall, there's a large glass wall, and that's where you look out to the walled garden. And it's a very large courtyard, if you will. And then on the side, there's a center corridor, and then on the left, it's all glass wall, so you can look out onto this extraordinary courtyard. The residents have taken ownership of that. Penrose provides a stipend each year to go out and to provide you know, to buy shovels and plants and all kinds of things that they need. And so today it has won 3 blue ribbons from the Horticultural Society. Not it, but the residents who take care of it have won 3 blue ribbons. And if you anybody on the call knows the Pennsylvania Horticulture Society, they're the real deal. So it's just a lovely place to visit every day and to see how beneficial it is to the residents who live there. As far as the programming goes, I'm there in 2 days a week, normally Thursdays and Fridays, and providing activities and events. We have weekly mahjong. We have a weekly support group that meets online. There's a Friday night game group that actually the Philadelphia runners organize it. They come in, Pride Run group, and it's an intergenerational. And in the warm months they take walks, and in the colder months they do games and play cornhole and puzzles and lots of things. So on the bi-weekly, I have a wonderful grant that the community center has received during the pandemic for food and nutrition. And we bring in fresh food and groceries and poultry and pantry items and just the whole gamut of food every other week, and set it up as best we can like a farmer's market. And then the residents just come down and shop. They bring their bags and they just shop, and it's great. Not only it fills people with the food that they need, but it's also a great and especially during the pandemic was a way for people to start building community and to stay in community as they age. So so that's just been a gift that we look forward to every other week. Monthly, we have birthday parties, and there's we have a partnership with Action Wellness, who has a social worker there every other week that helps people with benefits assessments and completing forms for city, state, and national programs, that entitlement programs. And so later this month, actually next week, we're gonna have an open mic night. So one of the piano players from Tavern on Kamak is coming over to sing and play piano, and hopefully get some residents up to sing. There is residents have this no joke newsletter, monthly newsletter that they put together, and I am lucky to have a social supportive services section that I put all the things that are important to us in supportive services. But the Mazzoni Center has been with us all the way through the pandemic, coming over to do early vaccinations, and they've come back many times, and are coming next month to do, once they get the new vaccine, they'll be doing that, and they're going to do a couple of flu clinics. So we're just really happy to have community partners like the Mazzoni Center and Action Wellness. And we just have a lot of community engagement. That's one of the main objectives, is to have people in the community come in and have intergenerational programs, use the space for fundraisers. And we had a great pet clinic during the summer. We have, birthday parties out in the garden, and just anything that's appropriate for joy and fun. I try to work with the community and to make it happen at John C. Anderson. So that's just a little bit about supportive services. And Jacob Fisher is next, and he's going to talk a little bit about what Penrose has in store. So thank you all.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. I actually almost don't want to talk about the development process of John C. Anderson. First of all, because I'm going to talk about another development, and you just framed it so nicely, what's happening in the building, and in a way it's more interesting than the development part. Like, there was definitely a lot of challenges along the way. I would mention that our partner in the development was Mark Siegel of the Philadelphia Gay News. Dr. Woody mentioned the importance of political support in order to leverage the resources, the approvals, the site in certain cases, to make your project work. And I can't say enough about the work that Mark did to lay the groundwork for political support. And Dr. Woody mentioned the governor and the senators, but I would also stress to the Central PA folks that your state legislators are really, really important to this process, because some of the state resources in the form of redevelopment capital assistance grants come through the state, and they tend to be closer to that capital than certainly than the U.S. senator, and then I guess the governor's got a pool as well. But everybody's important. When you get to do a groundbreaking, you get to have 12 speakers at the groundbreaking who all will take full credit for the great project that you have completed. So I'm going to share my screen now, hopefully. All right, sorry, started in the middle. All right, so briefly wanted to introduce Penrose. We are a national development company based in Philadelphia. We've been in business for 50 years. We've developed more than 27,000 units of housing, and we're privately held company that has really built its success and track record on partnerships with community-based organizations, with institutional organizations, with municipalities, counties, housing authorities. So our work is highly collaborative. We're a mission-driven organization with a vision to be the top developers and to really be on the cutting edge of good real estate development. We focus on multifamily, mixed income, and the majority of the work that we do is affordable. And one of our core values is around collaboration, which really is, in our DNA to work with other organizations to help those organizations conceptualize and achieve their vision. This is a slide showing the places where we have developments. The white dots are places where we have regional offices. The star is Philadelphia, for those of you playing along at home. And that is where our headquarters is based. We have over 400 people working in our management side, and we manage the bulk of the developments that we complete, except in some of our expansion areas. So in 2010, 2011 or so, we had the honor of getting to have a shot at developing what ultimately became the John C. Anderson apartments, which Ed has so nicely framed the what it's like to live there. I was a little astounded that was 10 years ago that it opened, and I'm just kind of reeling from that announcement. And then that has really led us into a number of other developments serving the LGBTQ plus community and working with partners. So we have currently a development in Boston, which is under construction, called the Pride, which I'll show some pictures of. We have a long-standing effort at a project called Haven Green in New York City, which has been the subject of tons of neighborhood opposition and litigation, not so much because of the character of what we're building as far as at least what their statements are, more towards the concern about loss of open space. And then we have a project on the books in New Haven, which will be an adaptive reuse of a historic school. And we have a project that we are working on in Baltimore that's looking for a site right now, and a project in Colorado, in Denver, that's also looking for a site. So these are a few pictures of the exterior of John C. Anderson. I am kicking myself for not having a picture of the interior courtyard, which is really kind of the piece de resistance of the whole downstairs, and really the garden is as fabulous as Ed described. And I think really is indicative of the community that's been built in that building, that residents are active and engaged in programming. I think a lot of that is due to the programs that's offered by Ed and people that he's able to bring in, and then also just to the nature of the community and the people that have elected to live there, and their desire to work together on projects and be present with each other. So you get the feeling, and we've developed a lot of senior housing of all kinds in all kinds of places, and every building has its own vibe to it. Just you can tell by how many people are sitting downstairs when you come in, and are the residents talking to each other? Do you come in and nobody's downstairs and it's quiet? And and so in John C. Anderson, there's always somebody there. That person is always ready to tell you their story and also show you their apartment. Like it's a very welcoming place that way. So these are a few pictures. Switching gears, this is in our project in Boston, the Pride, which is in Hyde Park section of the city. Don't really ask me the geography of Boston. But so this was a historic school. It's going to be 74 units. It's going to open in March. There's already a wait list or a interest list that has been generated of over 500 people. So there's going to be a lottery to select the people that will have the opportunity to apply. So tremendous interest in this work. Our partner in Boston is called LGBT Senior Housing, Inc., which is an organization that really formed around the idea of trying to build this type of housing. And so it was started by some community activists, an architect who is very interested in senior housing generally, and personally interested in LGBTQ senior housing, and others that were interested. And they have really, worked together to marshal, first of all, to get site control of this school, which was a complicated process through the city and through the school district, and then to pull together all the funding that has been required. And this project was in the news a couple of months ago when the Republican House members pulled some of the funding for 3 different LGBT partners, projects or organizations, out of that CDS spending bill. And so this was one of the impacted projects. And the happy end to that story is that the Senate has reinstated the dollars, and the dollars are actually going to go towards property operations once the building is built. So Elizabeth Warren and her colleagues looked up and said, hey, we're not going to let this happen to this organization. So an upsetting story with a good ending. And so here are the board members of LGBTQ Senior Housing, Inc., and an outside exterior shot of the school that will become the Pride. So the development that actually was asked to talk about today, and we'll talk about, is John Arthur Flats. And this is in Northside neighborhood of Cincinnati. The story of this building is that Penrose was selected by a community development corporation called Nest, which is a Northside based organization that had this site. And initially it was a former supermarket that was defunct. And I think they tried for many, many years to reinstate the supermarket, and really, because of some changes in the neighborhood, couldn't get an operator to come in, and just really couldn't make the project work. And so ultimately decided to do housing on the site. And Northside neighborhood, for anybody that is familiar with Cincinnati, had been it's never termed the gayborhood, but it had been sort of the center of LGBTQ life in Cincinnati. And so when we engaged with them, we showed them imagery of John C. Anderson and talked about some of the other work that we were doing. And the group became very, very interested in doing LGBTQ plus senior housing. And one of the first things that that they did was reach out to supporters. And so one of the early supporters and consistent supporters is John Oberfeld, who was the former husband, or his husband who passed away, was John Arthur, and the two of them were the named plaintiffs in the marriage equality case. And so he has been very supportive, and I think owns a winery and has a vintage of wine, which when sold raises money for some of the activities at the building. So the property itself is a 57 unit senior affordable building, LGBTQ friendly. It has community space. It has a roof deck and a dog park, an outdoor patio. It was completed at the end of 2022 and was built, closed and built through the pandemic. So faced all of the construction challenges and supply chain issues that projects faced through that period of time. The financing, the building, this is sort of eye-popping for anybody that develops here in Philly or really in the Northeast, in terms of the cost. It's sort of being able to do this many units at this cost, but I guess it's Ohio. So sources of funds were a private loan, home funds from the city of Cincinnati, Federal Home Loan Bank, which is a source of funds. There are federal home loan banks all around the country that have a program called the Affordable Housing Program that puts, kind of depending on the size of the bank and what, their program, anywhere from 500 to, in some cases, $1.5 million into affordable housing developments. The major driver of the whole capital stack here is tax credit equity and some reinvested developer fee. So the key financing partners here, Ohio Housing Finance Agency, they are the sister agency of the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency. Every state has its own HFA, and the HFAs are, typically have a couple of different functions, but one of the key functions is going to be the administration of the federal low-income housing tax credit program, which is a program that promotes public-private partnerships where a private entity will purchase the tax credits for a property, for a specific project. The equity, the dollars that they use to purchase those tax credits are put into that project, and in return, that investor will get 10 years worth of tax credits, which is a reduction of the amount that they're paying in taxes. Based on that amount is going to be based on the size of the investment and the number of tax credits. And so then we had this Fifth Third Bank, which was the construction lender and also the investor. The city of Cincinnati participated, FHLB, and then we have CREA, which was the tax credit investor. They put together a fund of other investors to purchase the tax credits, and then some local community-based organizations as well. And so here is the tree that is planted in the courtyard in memory of John Arthur. And some of the challenges that we faced here, which I think really shows how well you're going about your efforts in Central PA, really revolved around the fact that this project came together pretty quickly. The community organization had the site, and all of the stars aligned. We were funded in the first time that we applied for tax credits. We were able to put the deal together, and somehow, some way through the COVID pandemic, we're able to close and get the project built. Now, we had some challenges on lease up. The property delivered in November of 2022, which is a hard time to lease up. You're getting into holiday time, you're getting colder. It can be a challenge to, get seniors out to wait in line or to, come to interviews. And so that can be a challenge. And I think the bigger challenge was, initially there was not the level of interest in the building that you would think, right? Just by calling it LGBTQ plus senior housing doesn't mean that everybody's going to run to sign up to live there. And I think some of that may have to do with history of Cincinnati and of the community in Cincinnati that was, maybe didn't necessarily always want to be found. And so I think that, if you had it to do over again, there would be more of a elongated process and more community partners on the ground that could do the work of garnering the interest list. I talked about that interest list in Boston. All of those people will still have to submit their paperwork to get entered into the lottery, and other people will come and be entered into the lottery as well. But you really need to have that interest list to make sure that the people you're trying to reach with the building are going to know about it, right? That's important. And you still also have to follow fair housing, which means that everybody also has to know about it. You have to market it to everybody. So, we have actually been able to complete the lease up of this building. We have several residents that are from the local neighborhood, from the community. We advertised in different places, like on buses and on the local NPR affiliate, and did some other things that we don't typically do, and we're able to kind of ramp up the interest level. But it was initially slow, and that can be solved by having more of a ground game ahead of the Lisa. And I guess you could also blame the pandemic, which is what you blame for everything. So the last slide here is, I just wanted to share a slide that shows a little bit of like how I see the roles and responsibilities of the community-based organization, if the community-based organization wants to work with a developer on on any project, but on these projects. So this community-based organization is the lead in terms of face of the project, the ground game that I referred to, and really politically too, because the assumption is that a lot of those relationships are somewhat established, and we can support them, but it's really, you get all the credibility from having the local organization as the face of the project, so to speak. The community-based organization can help to identify population, provide input into site selection. Thomas mentioned in his presentation the importance of in their presentation, the importance of site, of having a site, the difficulty of finding a site. I know Lancaster is challenging, the land values are super high, and so kind of maybe somebody has their eye on something, and certainly having that in mind from the beginning is important. Community-based organization can provide supportive services in the new building, and certainly help with the political support and fundraising. And the developer sits at the table to listen to all of the the hopes, wants, dreams of the organization and the community, and figure out how to turn it into a building, bringing the design team to the table, and working through what's achievable with the site that's been selected. Developer takes on the construction, so these developments work, and this financing arrangement works because the developer is providing its balance sheet as a guarantor for a number of key things. Certainly anything associated with the financing, construction completion, lease up, tax credits, meaning that once you actually build this building, you're going to lease it to people that are income eligible to live there, and then property operations, and insulates the nonprofit from having to make any of those guarantees. The developer will collaborate with the nonprofit to make sure that we're putting together a partnership that makes sense based on what everybody is working on, their relative roles and responsibilities, and risk exposure, etc. Developer ultimately is responsible for securing the financing and then overseeing the construction and making sure that it's done correctly. So it's a real meaningful partnership where everybody's got their lane, and if executed right, that collaboration can work fantastically, and it can lead to a new building, which is what my fervent hope is for everybody on this call. And that's it.
Well, thank you very much, Jacob. We appreciate you being here today and sharing those great projects. So we would like to, let's see. Yeah, we'd like to begin the Q&A portion of the discussion. We have a couple of questions that the team here has put together already for the presenters. We'd like each of the presenters to address these, if you would. The first one is, what lessons have you learned that you feel are important to pass on to others seeking similar development projects? And the second is, how is your project sustained post-construction? So if we could start with Dr. Woody first.
Great questions. So for the second one, we're not post-construction, so I'll pass on that.
Yeah.
And the first one, I think I can't say enough about, and Jacob mentioned this too, about having allies and supporters. They come in almost for us. They are every step within every step of the way. And I didn't mention our local supporters having really ground in DC. It's first your ANC folks, and then your city council. And the ANC folks, we invited them to forums. We attended ANC meetings, which often are like watching paint dry, but we presented at those meetings. And so for me, that would be just making sure your community is involved. Those are your supporters. That's who's going to, those people help you get over the top.
Great, thank you. How about Ed?
Yeah, thanks, Barry. I know it wasn't in the cards for John C. Anderson because the huge cost of having an upgraded, chef's kitchen or industrial kitchen, but we always people always ask us, why don't you get the food program from PCA, from the AAA, and we just don't we don't have the capacity to live up to those requirements of ovens and freezers and that. So yeah, we wish we could have that, but we do a lot of we worked around that. And I don't think we had some early conflict resolutions, just I think we just had this utopian idea that we would all get along, and as months went on, there were some people that didn't get along, and so we just thought we could just work it out and have coffee. But we did learn that we had to learn more about how to navigate those situations and how to really invest time and energy so that everybody was being heard and that things were worked on. So so that would be one thing, just personally, that I wish I would have had more preparedness of. But yeah, that's all I can think of right now.
Okay. How about in terms of sustaining the project post-construction? Have you how have you dealt with that? I know you mentioned the grant that you got and some other money that the programming puts into the apartments, but
part of the memo of understanding with Penrose is that we invoice Penrose for my services there, and they pay William Way as a part of the I guess part of my salary. I don't see where the money goes exactly. And the Philadelphia Corporation for Aging gives the community center funding for all of our senior programs. So we really depend on those specific grants and just general spending grants to sustain our program. So,
all right.
Oh, and I should say that the closets in those apartments there's a huge walk-in closet. And Mark Siegel said we must have space for all these LGBT people's clothes to fit in these closets. So you remember, it was the fun. And they're a good sized closet.
Always important.
Yeah.
I seem to remember that Mark, that was called the drag queen closet. I think that was what Mark was pushing.
And Jacob, can you take the next?
Sure. I mean, I mentioned a few of the learnings from John Arthur flats as just the importance of what you're doing right now, and having really good outreach ahead of the lease up. I think that I have one learning is somewhat of a poignant one for me, which is that I think at the when we opened John C. Anderson, like marriage equality, it was like just passing the Supreme Court, and somebody actually quoted me back to myself saying, like, I don't know how many more of these are going to be required. And then of course we've seen where our politics have gone, and some of the challenges at Pride. I mean, we've had at Pride, besides the congressional issue, we had somebody vandalize the construction site, writing some dumb stuff on the construction signs, which of course, like, the community overwhelmingly came out in opposition to and in solidarity with us. But the need for this persists anywhere and everywhere, and I feel very strongly about that. From a construction standpoint, the terrace, the roof deck that Ed mentioned is something that was critical to our design. It was like I don't know, Mark Siegel and I kind of butted heads about that for a minute, and first of all, you never want to butt heads with him. And second of all, he was right. And that's been a really important space for people to have the opportunity to be outside and get some sun. And so I would say that's a key piece. And then on the sustaining side of things, these developments have tend to have a supportive service line item in their operating budgets, which is what Ed's organization, William Way, is paid out of. And then also if able to, out of the capital budget, funds can be escrowed to help to support the supportive services. But it really is the operating margins on affordable housing development are very thin. The rents, the rents are restricted by income, and the expenses are not restricted by anything. So if you can make your property operate at a positive, in the black by even a few $1,000s a year, that's a win. But it means that there's not tons of money thrown off to do other things, or tons of room in the operating budget. So there's a line item, there are escrows, and then there's a lot of outside support, which Ed and others have been really helpful, have been successful. I guess in John Arthur Flats, a winery can have a vintage that will support the effort. But I think that's a neat example of people in the community that might be interested in supporting your development.
Great. Well, thank you. At this time, we'd like to open it up to anyone who has questions or comments in the audience. We'll start with the chat first and give folks in the two in-person audiences a chance to think and write down their questions or comments, and we'll collect those.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to read out the questions in the chat here. And the panelists, feel free to jump in whichever you'd like to respond to. All right, so here's a question. How do these housing programs provide support as entities for only the LGBT plus community and not be open to others?
I think Jacob mentioned it earlier that we've all been saying affirming and welcoming. You cannot not have it open to others, right? So there's some ways you can make sure that it's focused on LGBTQ plus SGL folks, where you can't discriminate.
And to put even a finer point on it, there's no checkbox on the application, right? Like this is something that if you've done your outreach correctly, you'll, and made it clear that this is an affirming community, you're going to end up with people of that community and also allies that want to live in that environment.
Right. And let me share a story. When we were figuring out our marketing for this, we had a small business owner, property management team of color, small business of color owner who was going to do our property management. And they took it to their attorney, and the attorney, this is during 45's presidencies, and they took it to their attorney to look it over, and the attorney was adamant that we could not even use the word affirming or welcoming. Can't do any of that. I mean, really shut it down. I was so incensed. But I called Sage because I called Sage, and they came through. Sydney came through. I just lost her name for a second, but Sydney came through, and we had some attorneys on that can't happen. So I want to say on the flip side of that, even though we serve everyone, we have the ability and the right to say LGBTQ plus SGL welcoming and affirming. We have the right to say that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Oh, go ahead, Jacob.
I just want to tell one very brief anecdote that's riffing on that statement, which is we definitely, our ownership like got it from the beginning that this was, this was a marketing issue, that it was, there's a way to talk about this and completely not run afoul of fair housing. We did have some people on the property management side that had some heartburn about it, and we brought in some fair housing attorney, and we're on a phone, we're like proceeding to closing, right? Like the financing is all in place, and we have this fair housing attorney on the phone, which apparently we were paying, and she said, well, could you move the jurisdiction? And I said, did you just tell me to move the building that we're about to build to some other place? I think this phone call is over. And we persevered, and it is totally, you can, if you do it right, you're doing it right.
And my understanding with John C. Anderson was it youth that stood in line to help hold spots for LGBTQ older adults? Is that correct?
Yeah, I was telling this story. It was just lovely, so that the seniors wouldn't have to wait in line for the morning of the lease up. I think the seniors had already pre-qualified, and it was just a matter of waiting in line to get in. And I'm not sure about that. But anyway, the idea was, and Mark Siegel had this idea, to rather than have the seniors wait in line to get in, the Penrose had their offices at William Way at the time for the lease up. And so they called on the local college students around the area to come and stand in line on behalf of the seniors. And that was really fun, and they enjoyed it immensely. So they were in, chairs and blankets and, just camped out. And I think there was an exchange. I think they had a ticket number, and then the seniors came at like 8 a.m. and exchanged the ticket or whatever the clarification was, and the seniors got in that line, and then the kids went home. So yeah, it's cool.
Well, it's beautiful intergenerational work right there. All right, so I think we've covered all of the questions in the chat. Are there questions in person in Harrisburg? All right, Kate, do you have questions in person in Lancaster for our panelists?
I think we're okay. Anybody have questions? Yeah, that was incredible. Thank you so much. That was really, really wonderful. I'm so grateful for all of your time. And thank you, Amanda and Barry, for putting this together. Paula over here. So I really appreciate it. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kay. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to Barry.
Okay. So I'd like to invite Thomas and Sydney back on the call to make some final points and the conclusion to the program.
All right. Thank you all. That was wonderful. And I'm so glad to get to work with you all in this. It's truly a community effort. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges and lessons learned that we see across the country in different developments. But also at SAGE, as folks may know, SAGE was a part of the development of New York City's first two LGBTQ plus affirming senior residences, one in the Fort Greene neighborhood of Brooklyn called Stonewall House. It's 145 units, and one in Cortona Park neighborhood of the Bronx, which is 84 units. And we have some of this on our website, so I'm not going to ramble too long, but we have kind of lessons learned as this kind of case study, because when SAGE went into a partnership with some developers to do this, we were very green. And it was actually, this process started way before I was even at SAGE. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some lessons learned if we want to go to the next slide. And thank you, Thomas, again, for doing these slides. I don't want to repeat myself, but folks mentioned the fair housing regulations. So, you know, you have to follow fair housing laws in your marketing, in your lease up process, which means you cannot build LGBTQ plus exclusive housing. And this is a question that we get a lot when we're providing consulting or TA. But, you know, fair housing laws are critically important, as we all know, in terms of protecting protected classes. But if you're working with a, for example, rolling lottery system, and our developer friends can probably speak more to this, it's difficult to flag deeply vulnerable LGBTQ plus folks. So you're relying on systems that are not always inclusive or affirming for LGBTQ plus communities. So how do you find folks? And it's really that marketing and that outreach and doing the best outreach that you possibly can. So for example, if trans elders don't feel safe in homeless shelters, the shelters that refer into a building are not accurately representing the needs of homeless trans elders. And so if someone is couch surfing or street homeless, you know, folks are not captured in common referral systems. So the fair housing regulations are important, and they can also be a challenge. And I'll talk a little bit more about how to address those. For community buy-in, to ensure reach and inclusion, it's so important to begin targeted outreach to potential residents, to the community members, to elected officials, such as y'all are doing so well right now. From ideation onward, the community input and participation is so critical to the success of a project. SAGE engaged in rigorous in-person events and outreach in town halls, as well as through community partners, digital media. But, you know, I think we could have even started sooner. So there was some community pushback in the Fort Greene neighborhood, for example. This is a Brooklyn neighborhood that has experienced really intense displacement of Black communities, and a new building, even if it's 100% affordable according to AMI levels, may trigger fear in the community that this is another part of gentrification and displacement, and who is getting these units. And so you really need to be intentional in who you are engaging and what you are hearing and learning from the community to help that inform your process. This also means, you know, community buy-in means building with local elected officials. Thank you so much. I'm so glad that the mayor's here tonight, and that can make such a huge difference. And folks in elected positions have a lot of power over messaging and public discourse. Gap funding is always a challenge. Developer folks, the developers are far more familiar with how to do this best than I am, but finding gap funding can always be a challenge. And sometimes you need to be creative and scrappy, research private philanthropic organizations, lending institutions, thinking about places like the Federal Home Loan Banks, trusts. And it's not always easy, but if you're working, you know, we've worked a lot with our colleagues at Penrose. And if you're working with folks that really know this process, finding key partners from the beginning that are mission aligned, that are trustworthy, that you can build trust with, can be really critical in these kind of financing pieces. And then thinking about issues of intersectionality. So people and Dr. Amani always speaks so beautifully to this, and it's the mission of her work. But, you know, when folks experience intersecting forms of oppression, that's not always centered in the stereotypes or assumptions we make around who is a part of the LGBTQ plus community or the same gender loving community. And we know that racism and transphobia, for example, can exist in LGB spaces. And so we also know issues, like I mentioned, of displacement are not unique to just LGBTQ plus aging community. So it's critically that we think about the communities that we are working with and hoping to house with an intersectional lens, and think about the kinds of legacies of racialized displacement that is a part, unfortunately, of housing development in many, many contexts. And centering the needs of vulnerable folks in our communities. Next slide, please, Thomas. I am just going to talk a little bit about lessons learned. So in terms of intentional outreach, I mentioned this, but like internal partnerships, external partnerships are crucial. And this means, like I said, outreach, town halls, LGBTQ plus groups, social or religious institutions, neighborhood associations, community boards, and then thinking about who is a part of that outreach, right? So we hear often like folks might have an advisory board, or they might go to a community board meeting or something. But if the loudest voices in those spaces look the same and are of the same economic bracket, right? You need to think about who's even missing from those spaces. So community board meetings are great. And also, how are we reaching everyone in this process? Building at the speed of trust. Trust does not happen overnight. We have been seeing this in all of the projects that we've helped, support or provided TA around, and in some of the community engagement that Thomas is leading in Baltimore right now, particularly. But if you're committed to deep accountability, building trust with the community doesn't always fall on the same timeline as LIHTC applications and deadlines for site acquisition. And so we know that it already takes a good amount of time to build housing. And sometimes, even if it's really hard, we need to take a step back and say we need to build a little bit more trust with the community around how we're doing this and who it is impacting. Community participation, like I said, is critical. Engaging with leaders who are already doing work in the community. Government support, like I said, you want to build the case with government entities from the beginning. So for example, in New York City, which is very specific, we're working with HPD, with Human Resources Administration, Department of Homeless Services, all of these different entities. You really want to help build the case for key decision makers in terms of applications and things like that. And then organizational support. So your team and the foundation of your nonprofit or your agency or your community group, everyone needs to be on board. It's a huge undertaking, and just making sure everyone is mission aligned in terms of their goals and their personal hopes for a project. It seems really simple, but I think some of the biggest challenges that we've seen in folks' processes is when there's a disconnect around the mission and the purpose of a building. So that's really important. And then lastly, we have a lot of information about this, but culture building, from ideation through construction to lease up, and then in terms of operations and perpetuity, it's so important to set the tone to build the culture of a space. And this happens in many ways. It can happen in the processes, and it also happens in the operations. So some examples of culture setting: affirming intake forms. So forms that people have to fill out that include LGBTQ plus identities. It might be the first time someone sees their identity reflected on an intake form. Community agreements. These can be collective guidelines that someone signs or sees in the onboarding process, in the lease up process, or when they're introduced to a unit in the application process. And it might just include expectations around behavior, around what kind of space you want this to be, around bias, and around conflict resolution, and just community norms. It doesn't even have to be a legal agreement, but setting those community norms so that people are fully aware of what space you want to create. And then thinking about the operational piece, which is, after the building opens, but something to think about the whole time, programming, signage, art, literature, visual cues in the building that this is an affirming space, rainbow flags, trans flags, creating a culture of affirmation without necessarily talking, because not everyone wants to talk about their identities or about being part of the community. But indicators can go a really long way, especially if someone is isolated and has very warranted kind of trust issues because of, experiences of trauma. Thinking about recognition of holidays, how this influences the climate of the space, movie nights, book nights, libraries, what literature is in libraries, community dinners. We know that food is one of the ways that people really can come out, and isolation can be braked with rituals and gatherings around food. And then next slide, thank you, Thomas. I am just gonna close with a little bit of information about some of the resources that SAGE's National Housing Initiative provides. And I'm happy, and Thomas is happy to answer any questions, and we can share our information. But we are really, the purpose of the National Housing Initiative, one of them is to be a resource to you and to folks that have questions about building housing, about the development of housing, or just creating home that is safe for LGBTQ plus elders. So we have free online trainings that you can take around a wide range of issues, from intentional design to light tech to intersectional cultural competencies, thinking about things that I didn't mention, but something that I think is a growing field and is so powerful is trauma-informed building design, and the ways that space and physical infrastructure can promote healing and resilience, especially because we see disparate rates of cognitive decline and even dementia in LGBTQ plus aging communities, which is deeply connected to experiences of discrimination. We have a toolkit around different pieces of the housing development process, outreach, data, et cetera. We have a primer that showcases models that are open across the country. And I think Dr. Amani's project will be in our next edition, I hope. The John C. Anderson is in there. And it's a primer that just talks about different models of affirming housing across the country, their size, their financing, their service provider, and their journey. So there's a narrative around how places came to be, and then who were the key partners and players in that. We also provide referrals to key folks that people might want to talk to. So does someone want information from a CDFI? We have a contact at this place. Really trying to connect people to networks of folks that have experience and expertise in the ways that people need, that is catered to what you're looking for. So in that way, we provide technical assistance. And then we also have virtual roundtables, regional roundtables, focusing on different areas of the country. Like Thomas mentioned, we have one focused on Pennsylvania. And we are hoping, since the NHI will be turning 10 in 2025, we're hoping to have our first after 2020 in-person event to celebrate 10 years and to bring together stakeholders to talk more about these projects and build the case publicly, but also provide resources for folks interested in this work. I might have talked too fast, but I wanted to make sure I got through all that. So this is some information. This is Thomas and myself's email address. And if you go to SAGE's website, you can search, or you can also Google the National Housing Initiative. And there's it's a repository of all kinds of information, lessons learned, a case study in SAGE's housing development process, our trainings, et cetera. So yeah, I think I will stop there and see if folks have any questions, and I'm happy to chat.
Great. Well, thank you, Sydney. I want to thank all of our presenters and speakers for this very informative program. And thank all of our attendees as well for participating. If there are additional questions that you have right now, we can take them, or If they occur to you after the program, you can feel free to email us with your question or comment. And the email is history@centralpalgbtcenter.org. I'll say that again, history@centralpalgbtcenter.org. And we'll put that in the chat, I think, too, for you. Also, I wanted to let you know that you can also email us if you would like to volunteer for our initiative task force. We have one in Harrisburg and we have one in Lancaster, so you can volunteer for either or both. If you're not on the LGBT Center's mailing list or email list, I encourage you to go to our website and sign up for the mailing list, so you get information about all future forums and also all the other great programming and events that the center sponsors. And that website is centralpalgbtcenter.org. We'll also be posting a recording of this program on the web on probably YouTube, our YouTube channel, but we'll have a link to it somewhere on our website, I'm sure. So you can also go back and review it if you want, or share it with friends. Send the link out to friends you think might be interested in the program as well. So with that, are there any final questions before we close out? Nothing in the chat. Okay. Well, thank you all again, and we appreciate your participation. We look forward to talking more about this program in the future.